Well, good afternoon and welcome to today's presentation called History Through Song and Ballad. The reason I decided to do this kind of a program, number one, is because I have a love for all kinds of music, whether it be country, bluegrass, or blues, or heavy metal. And I also have a passion for love or for history. And over the course of several years, a lot of historical theme music has been written by some of the most well-known musicians as well as artists, as well as other bands that many people don't know exist today. So my name is John Miller. I'm the executive director here at the Shippensburg Historical Society. And today we're going to kind of go over just real quickly some of the music that describes American history through song or through ballad. Now, when it comes to traditions or historical events, music has always been there to record that. Even through some of the earliest forms of folk music that would come out of Europe, particularly with maybe Scandinavia, or maybe the Germanic tribes, or maybe Roman times. But as North America becomes populated by the English as well as the French, music comes over here as well, and it also records some of the historical events, daily activities that have occurred. And music is a great resource when it comes to trying to understand historical events, even though sometimes music and the lyrics are not always 100% accurate. So today we're going to go ahead and just kind of break down some of the historical events that shaped America with some of my favorite songs of all times. So we're going to go ahead and switch over. Hopefully you can see this. So history told through songs and ballads. I love the fact that I can kind of take both of my love for music as well as history and put everything together. And I think today's presentation is going to be pretty interesting because of the fact that it's going to showcase a wide range of music through different bands and such. And we'll go ahead and cover starting with the Revolutionary War period and make our way all the way up to the American Revolution. So first on our presentation here, there's not a whole lot of Revolutionary War songs that are out there. And because of that, I was digging through my personal library of CDs and records, and I remembered this band called Iced Earth. And in 2004, they released an album called The Glorious Burden. And on that, they kind of shook up their themes of what they normally would do as far as songwriting. Usually this band would talk about horror or ugliness in life. And this time, all of a sudden, they decided they were going to put an album together dedicated to military history. And on this record, we have Valley Forge, which is a song that commemorates the Continental Army's hardships during the winter of 1777 and 1778. After the fall of Philadelphia, and with George Washington's failed attempt to retake Philadelphia, he went into winter quarters. And from there, he was basically tasked with trying to re-equip, resupply his army, which became a crisis, as well as trying to reorganize and retrain. And because of that, out of 12,000 soldiers, upwards of 2,000 men perished. And this was a very dark period of the American Revolution because this could make or break our war for independence. So I chose Iced Earth with their song called Valley Forge to kind of start this presentation off, because it's a great song. And the lyrics themselves kind of put you in mind of a Continental soldier. So here it is from 2004 from their Inglorious Burden record. Here is Valley Forge, and just kind of pay attention to the lyrics that I have on the screen. It's going to start off with an acoustical piece, and then after that, the power metal of it's going to go ahead and pick up from there.
Close your eyes and imagine the soldier at Valley Forge. Cold War. Yet in his eyes, the iron will to win. And for the cause, he won't relent. Upon us now, with anger and disgust. The proud politics of what right and wrong. We'll be the same, no, it's not lazy, that's what it ought to be. The place that's blinded by
And then from there, he goes standing barefoot, frozen bloody hands, his muskets clutched, an iron grip, and for the cause, he has but one regret. He only has one life to give. So when you're looking at this song here, it does kind of take into consideration today's politics and how we see things, but at the same time, it also takes and paints you a very vivid, clear picture of what the situation was at Valley Forge in 1777 and 1778. Moving on, I'm sure everybody that would see this has all heard this song, The Battle of New Orleans by Johnny Horton. This song was written by Jimmy Driftwood, who was an Arkansas high school teacher as well as a principal, and he would conduct lessons by putting simple lyrics together in music, and that would teach his students about American historical events. When Johnny Horton recorded this in 1959, it became Song of the Year, and of course, Jimmy Driftwood, he received an award for being Composer of the Year. The War of 1812 was declared by the United States against England because of the fact that they were illegally boarding our ships and seizing American soldiers and pressing them into, or excuse me, American sailors and pressing them into the British naval service, as well as because of the war going on between Napoleon at the time, there were blockades set up which kind of disrupted our trade. And because of that, President James Madison, he had pretty much had enough of it. He declared war on England in 1812. By 1814, there was a sizable English force after a year of fighting in the Chesapeake Bay. And of course, there was a lot of fighting up along the Canadian and the United States border. But in 1814, that's when England decided they were going to go ahead and give us a grubbing. This war was not a war about the Second War of Independence. Our independence was never questioned. This was a war more about sovereignty as well as what's right. So the Battle of New Orleans, which was fought in January of 1815, was actually fought after the close of the War of 1812. But the lyrics, the music itself is so catchy, even though that most of the song here is factually incorrect, but still it's enough to get somebody interested and actually go to a history book and take a look for themselves. So without further ado, let's go ahead and look at just the first verse of Johnny Horton's Battle of New Orleans.
In 1814, we took a little trip along the Colonel Jackson down the mighty Mississippi. We took a little bacon and we took a little beans, and we caught the bloody British in a town in New Orleans. We fired our guns and the British kept coming. There wasn't quite as many as there was a while ago. We fired once more and they began to run on down the Mississippi to the Gulf of Mexico.
So just a very catchy song. It's got a lot of hooks into it that just kind of makes you want to toe tap, but at the same time, you're actually learning a little bit about history. Like I said, in 1814, Colonel Jackson did take a trip down the Mississippi because of the fact that he was going to go ahead and be tasked with the defenses of New Orleans. After the British had left the Chesapeake Bay in August and September of 1814, they figured a new strategy was definitely needed. So they went ahead and set sail for the Gulf of Mexico, where they would actually hit our trade markets at where the Mississippi River flows into the Gulf of Mexico. Now, during the song, they talk about a lot of different things going on here, such as we caught the bloody British in the town of New Orleans. We fired our guns and they kept it coming. That is true. The British kept testing our defenses, and each time they tested the defenses, the more and more casualties they began taking on. And the song is correct when they said there wasn't as many as there was a while ago. We fired once more, and they began running. And that was just because of the fact that the British were starting to lose manpower. There's one part of this song where they talk about the cannon barrels practically melting, and they're basically tossing alligators at them, which is absolutely an exaggeration. But still, this is an amazing piece of history right here, just because of the fact that it kind of gets you interested in history itself. Moving on, the Battle of Atlanta with Reno and Smiley, which was released in 1961. In 1961, the centennial of the American Civil War came about, and Reno and Smiley, who are a bluegrass duo, decided they were going to go ahead and commemorate the events from the first shot at Fort Sumter to Lee's army surrendering at Appomattox. Now, do grant, these songs at the time pretty much glorified the Confederacy, but they also talked about the Union Army as well. This song here, The Battle of Atlanta, is a classic ballad in which it starts off with basically a chorus, but then it goes right into a spoken word while the music plays in the background. For the most part, I wanted to showcase the Battle of Antietam, however, I could not find that to download in order to play. But with the Battle of Antietam that they did, of course, Antietam took place in September of 1862, the part of the song that they really incorporated was about the morning face with the bloody cornfield. And of course, that right there pretty much put a lot of the sorrow on the Confederate dead that had fallen that morning. The Battle of Atlanta was another song here that's kind of the same way, but it's a little more equally balanced. And at the end of the song, it talks about one brother fighting for the North and the other fighting for the South, and they found each other on the battlefield, which is kind of sad. So let's go ahead and take a listen to Reno and Smiley here with the Battle of Atlanta. Now we go to spoken word.
Atlanta, gate city of the South, was in the shade end of the Civil War fight, where William T. Sherman had 100,000 men backing up his might. General J. Johnston's 60,000 Confederates never had a chance to hit Sherman full force. Exacted as he delayed and harassed Sherman, hoping the price he paid would cancel Sherman's course. After General Johnston's failure against Sherman, he was replaced by a hot-headed, one-armed and one-legged General Hood. He attacked Sherman in the Battle of Peachtree Creek, and there Sherman made Lee wonder if the plan was really any good.
So just a sample there. You can hear the spoken word. For the most part, I mean, as far as like accuracy, this is a very brief generalization of the Battle of Atlanta as well as the Atlanta campaign. But again, it's well done, it's well thought out, and it's well written. And because of that, this is one of my favorite bluegrass songs by Reno and Smiley. Moving on, after the American Civil War, and actually before the American Civil War, we got to talk about the American expansion. And after the American Revolution was over, more and more people were moving into the frontiers of Kentucky as well as Ohio. Johnny Cash, who we all pretty much should have heard of, he actually did a concept record in 1965 called The Ballads of the True West. And he basically follows a family that moves to Kentucky in the 1790s. But from there, he also talks about how the expansionism impacted the Native Americans and how they were forced further west. But then when you get into the classic Wild West, he also talks about things like the Battle of OK or the shootout at OK Corral, or idolizing people such as Doc Holliday, John Wesley Hardin, and so on and so forth. Johnny Cash has always been a storyteller, and he tells some of the best stories. And particularly on this record here, there are a lot of spoken word as well as a lot of instrumentation that goes with it. And really, the thought of a concept album is something that is missing in country music today, but heavy metal as well as hard rock have really taken the concept album to a whole new level. So let's go ahead and look at Johnny Cash's 1965 release of the Ballad of Boot Hill. And this talks about the shootout at the OK Corral. And it's, for the most part, the first couple verses are from the point of the view of the Cowboys and not from Doc Holliday or the Earp brothers.
One day in 1881, the Tombstone Epitaph, a booming newspaper in a booming silver mining town, screamed out the headlines about a gunfight at the OK Corral right downtown. The headlines read, "Murder in the streets of Tombstone." Well, that wasn't such hot news, but more stark and spine-chilling than that was a sight on the boardwalk in front of the Epitaph building. Neatly laid out in beautiful caskets were the bodies of Tom McLaury, Frank McLaury, and young Billy Clanton, 28 years old. A witness at the trial later said that he saw Doc Holliday blast away with a nickel-plated pistol, and Billy Clanton screamed, "Don't shoot me, I don't want to fight." Today, there's no more silver mining in Tombstone, but up there on Boot Hill, you can see where the graves of the men are. The ones who fought over or because of that big silver strike that created Tombstone.
So just an interesting song, and for the most part, how Johnny Cash portrays this, his interpretation is very well balanced. And of course, when you're listening to him, how, Billy Clanton didn't want to fight, but yet Doc Holliday, you got to remember, I mean, this is in the heat of the moment, so there's a lot of things going through everybody's minds. But this song here, it's a very good song as far as the historical events of the OK Corral. In 1982, with their new singer Bruce Dickinson, Iron Maiden released Numbers of the Beast. And on this album here is a song called Run to the Hills. This song here, for the most part, documents the colonialization of America from the perspective from the first verse of the Cree Indian to the second verse, which comes from the American cavalrymen, to the third verse, which is the artists and the songwriters' theories as far as how the expansion pretty much affected the Indians and on the plains. This song here is really interesting, and growing up, I've heard this from my brother when it was first released in 1982, which, oh boy, I was pretty young then. But as I was growing up, this became one of the first songs that I realized that had a historical theme behind it, and because of that, I really enjoy the song even to this day. So let's go ahead and take a preview at Iron Maiden with Run to the Hills.
One man came across the sea. He brought us pain and misery. He killed our friends, he killed our free. He took our pain for his own need. We fought him hard, we fought him well. Out on the plains, we took him well. But when he came to us to free, oh, really did our peace free. Riding through the clouds and valley wastes. Galloping out on the plains. Chasing the redskins back to their holes. Fighting them at their own game. Out of the freedoms are stabbing them back. Women and children and cowards attack.
So from there, you can see that definitely comes from the Native Americans' perspective. So this song here is just well written. It's well thought out, and it's become a classic with pretty much any of us in the heavy metal fan base, particularly with Iron Maiden. So I was surprised when I heard this as a little boy, considering that one of my ancestors is General George Armstrong Custer. And of course, he and the famous 7th Cavalry attacked the Plains Indians at various places. But again, just a well-written out, thought out piece of music. In 1992, Man of War released an album called The Triumph of Steel. The first half of this record was a 30-minute song broken down into 8 individual pieces. Those pieces told the story of the Trojan War as written by Homer. And of course, this is the story of the Iliad. On that record was this song here called The Spirit Horse of the Cherokee. The song kind of starts out documenting the perspective of the American Indian, primarily with the Cherokee. But then as the song goes on, it goes into more perspective and details about the Midwestern Plain Indians and the tribes that are out there. And it talks about their experiences, how many of them were sold off into slavery or had their lands stolen. So this song here, again, is just well written out by Eric Adams, who's the lead vocalist of Man of War, as well as the rest of the band. And we'll go ahead and take a preview. It's a very long intro too, by the way. Now it pretty much builds up.
As the white man hunts for me. We are descendants of the animals. We live among them. Our trail of tears and bends. Wounded me.
So again, just an interesting perspective of an American band of how they've taken history and turned it into a song. And that's another thing too, is when you're looking at these songs that deal with historical events, there is a lot of research that has to go into it by the artists themselves. So my hat's off, because trying to write a song about a historical event, knowing that maybe you only have a verse of 4 sentences, is quite a lot of information to do. And these guys who are professionals, they do such a great job at it. Custer's Last Stand, written by the power metal artist from Sweden, actually called Civil War. This song here was released in 2012, and it kind of briefly tells you the story of Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer's last stand that took place on June 25th, 1876, between the Sioux tribe of the plains and the 7th U.S. Cavalry at a place called Little Bighorn. Get that awesome riff. So as you can see from that song there, a lot of historical information that goes into just that one verse right there. But for the most part, it's pretty accurate because, you know, the Plains tribes did band together. And of course, there were thousands of them. And they were pretty much determined to, you know, stop part of the expansionism, particularly with the U.S. cavalry. Excuse me. And of course, the cavalry was warned. So my hat goes off to these guys, especially being from Sweden and taking an interest in American history. Now, I'm not going to pronounce this because my French, believe me, is very horrible. But with the commemoration of World War I that just took place, there was a lot of interest, particularly in the heavy metal community. And in the 90s, it started out with a band called Bolt Thrower. And they did a lot of songs that were pretty much themed after World War I things, such as battles, men, tanks, so on and so forth. Well, that jumps over to another band called God Dethroned in the late 90s, or going into actually the 2000s, really. And again, tired of writing about songs about ugliness and horror, as well as, like, you know, evilness, the lead vocalist decided, hey, I'm going to go ahead and do a trilogy of trilogy of World War I albums. And he did such a great job with those 3 albums, you know, from Passchendaele to The Sign of the Iron Cross to A World Ablaze, that it took him a while to record those albums because of all the research that had to go into it. Those albums also inspired pretty much, I don't want to say it's a separate genre of the death metal community, but it's definitely, there's a couple bands out there that pretty much are releasing heavy metal music with themes of World War I. And listening to them and reading the lyrics, I am so amazed at how good these are and how accurate. This band called FT17 released an album as a concept album in 2016. And of course, they're from France. And what they did was they went ahead and gathered all these letters from a young French teacher by the name of, again, sorry out there, my French is horrible, but Marcelien Trevoux, who mobilized and fought with the 57th Infantry Regiment during the war. This record here, even though it is all in French and I cannot understand a word it says, I absolutely love the music and I love the overall feel of it. It's very exciting. I'm not really going to play, well, I'll tell you what, I wasn't really going to play any of this one here, but let's try it out. And I'll fast forward. But to a lot of people, that's noise. Okay, I understand that. But when you look at the English translations to these songs of theirs, it's absolutely amazing how well documented. And they just put a lot of effort into it. And I'm so glad to see that even though country bands aren't doing this anymore, and I know bluegrass really isn't as popular as what it used to be, I'm glad that somebody in the music world has taken up the torch and has decided, you know what, this is a good idea. We're going to keep going with it. So my hat's off to FT17. Another band is called 1914. They're based out of the Ukraine. In 2018, they released an album, actually several albums with, I think they have like 2 albums, and then they have a bunch of singles as well as an EP. Again, all World War I themed. They're not taking sides on anything. Everything is well balanced. But one of the songs that really caught my attraction, or my attention, that I was attracted to, was a song called Stormtroopers. And we know what stormtroopers are. They're pretty much like the special forces of the German military during World War I. Small groups of guys would race out of the trenches to try to attack and do basically a hit and run tactics on the other trench. And then from there, they would see what would happen. This song here is so well researched. When I'm looking at it on YouTube and such, I love how these guys actually put everything together. So with that right there, that is just an excellent description of what stormtroopers do. I mean, they're like vultures. They go out and they try to get it into the enemy's trenches and try to disrupt as much as they can. So moving on, after World War I, and before we go into the Great Depression, we need to go back and kind of focus on what's going on in Appalachia. And I love Appalachia because I'm from Appalachia. So West Virginia and Kentucky and the coal mines. And of course, we know the coal mines, the companies that owned them, the way they worked the workers was not exactly what we would consider as fair today. In fact, when you worked in a coal mine, as some of my relatives did, so you had the company that owned the coal mine. Well, you want to work for them, you're going to get paid in company script. You're going to live in a company house. You're going to go ahead and take your company script to the general store to buy stuff from there, as well as from the company grocery store. The minute that you don't want a coal mine anymore and you get fired from it, they basically go into the house, take all the stuff out, and they throw it out there, and you're evicted. You pretty much have nothing. There's no money because the script is only good for that general store. Well, because of how the labor was going with these coal mines, a lot of these men wanted to, these workers, they wanted to unionize. They wanted to have workers' rights. So in 2012, Panopticon, which is pretty much a one-man artist who, when he records, he did a concept album called Kentucky. And this talks about the state's bloodiest history, focusing on the miners' strikes, themes of workers versus the rich. And of course, what he does is he takes elements of extreme black metal and he mixes them with traditional bluegrass style. And the end result of that is that when this album opens up, you have a classic bluegrass, then it goes to very dark black metal, back to bluegrass, down to, and it just goes on so forth and so on and so forth. It is so interesting how one individual could take a time in history, build a concept album like that. And I'm usually not one who likes a lot of that extreme, like, you know, that extreme metal. For me, I'm more of a traditional guy, you know, thrash, death, and traditional. But knowing what he is singing about, it hits in my home because I know that some of my relatives pretty much would have went through this. Now, he did a song that was inspired by Pete Seeger, who basically was a balladeer, and he did a lot of history songs like Jesse James, and of course, and things like that. But this song here, Which Side Are You On, is a combination of his own lyrics mixed with the traditional lyrics of Pete Seeger, and he just does a wonderful job of getting and basically hitting this home. So let's check it out. If I can get this to work. There we go.
Come all you poor workers, good news to you all town of how that good old union has come in here to dwell. Which side are you on? 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 We're starting up on battle, you know we're sure to win, because we've got the good fellows looking pretty red. Which side are you on? 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 Which side are you on?
So you can kind of hear right there the history that's behind the coal miners' wars and the strikes. Which side are you on? We are starting our good battle. We know sure to win because we got the gun thugs looking pretty thin. And what that is a reference to is that a lot of these companies, they had their own security force. And those security force would go ahead and pretty much enforce whatever it was the company wanted. And in some cases, the security force would go ahead and skirmish with unarmed miners. And those miners couldn't take anything to the courts because a lot of times the companies owned not only the courts, but they also owned the sheriffs of these towns. So the only way for these miners to fight back was to actually pick up arms. And this part of our American history, this becomes the first time since the American Civil War that an actual army has to go out and put the rebellion down. And this is also the first time in American history, might I add, that the airplanes were actually used to drop missiles or drop bombs on top of many of these areas to squash the coal mining rebellion. Redneck War by the band called Byzantine was released in 2005. And they talk about the things that happened in West Virginia, particularly with the Battle of Blair Mountain, which was fought in 1921. Because of the fact that men wanted to unionize, these companies went ahead and basically called out to their, their representatives, and the National Guard was called in. And because of that, basically you have a civil war going on. Because of that, up to 100 people were killed. And many people were actually taken prisoner because of that. The reason they call it Redneck War is because in order for these men to determine who they were, to distinguish themselves from themselves versus the coal mine security and the National Guard, they wore a red bandana around their neck, and that's where the term redneck comes from. So this song starts out with like a fast acoustical piece, and then it's going to kind of pick up, and then after that you're going to hear the vocalist. Again, I understand that this might not be everybody's cup of tea as far as like music and singing styles, but what really counts is the actual lyrics themselves that you're viewing. So let's go ahead and check it out. Love that build up with the harmonics. So again, like I said, I know heavy metal's not everybody's cup of tea, but if you look at the lyrics as the song was playing, for the most part, Byzantine pretty much knocks it out of the park. And that's because these mining companies, a lot of them exploited the miners in order to get the coal exported. They also owned the laws. They also owned the police. And because of, they gained control through, the voting, so putting their own people into power. So it was not a very good time. And eventually the unions would be able to get into the coal mines. To lay down the Bible and take up the rifle, that was a last-ditch effort by these miners to get their point across. So Byzantine pretty much nails it, and they hit it out of the park. Then you go into World War II. Now, this here I had to be a little careful with, because some bands that write World War II themed songs, sometimes it could sound like it's being very pro-German. Or pro-Russian. So I tried to look for a song that was equally balanced, because we want to stay neutral. So I don't want to glorify Nazism it gets into a whole different aspect of it. So when you're looking at bands that do that, just be very careful. But if you're interested in heavy metal bands that really do a good job of interpretation, Just Before Dawn is a really good one. As well as Hail of Bullets. They're death metal, but they don't glorify anyone. They basically present facts to the listener, and it's up for the listener to say, okay, I'm going to research this out because this band really got me interested. This band called Accept in 2012, they released a song called Stalingrad. And of course, Stalingrad is one of the most bloodiest battles in the history of warfare, and with an estimated of 2 million total casualties. And this band here does such a great job of trying to basically tell the story pretty much from the Russian point of view, but it also kind of talks about the battle and stuff and how it ensues and how it kind of comes from everybody's point of view, because it's a nasty battle. So from there, it basically goes so hungry, so cold. Again, this song here is just so well done. And for these guys to really take this huge battle and put it into basically a 5-6 minute song, they did a really good job with. Unfortunately, I didn't even dare to venture to look for any Vietnam related songs, because a lot of the songs that came out of the 60s and early 70s, there was a lot of anti-war songs that were going on with it. So when you're listening to a group, you're thinking it might be maybe kind of like saying, thank you everybody for fighting that war. But then again, it's a protest song. So I did not want to do anything like that. So I went ahead and I was thinking, and I remember back in November, I posted on Facebook this song here called The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And this was recorded by Gordon Lightfoot in 1976. And it's a ballad that tells the tale of the Edmund Fitzgerald, which sunk on November 10th, 1975 in Lake Superior. This song here, I forget who originally wrote it, but it was originally entitled The Ballad of the Edmund Fitzgerald. But this song is so beautiful as far as like how it's written and how it honors all the people that perished on that ship when it went down in November. So here's a sample of that. Whoops.
The legend lives on from the Chippewa down the big lake they call Gitchagumi. The lake, it is said, never gives up the dead when the skies of November turn gloomy. With a load of iron ore, 26,000 tons more than the Edmund Fitzgerald weighed empty. That good ship and true was a bone to be chewed when the gales of November came early.
So again, the gales of the gales of winter came in early in November, and because of that, the winds pretty much the Edmund Fitzgerald that sunk. So it's a very powerful song. It's got a lot of feeling and emotion behind it. And again, like I said, it's really well written. So not all historical events can be about war. A lot of them could be about tragedy. Now, most of us remember 9/11. And then after that, we remember so many musicians that were pretty much helping all of us to unite as a whole on 9/12. So we had heavy metal bands, we had country bands, we had pop artists, all were writing songs dedicated to those who perished on 9/11, whether it was from the World Trade Centers or the Pentagon or Flight 93 in Somerset County. Neil Young in 2002 went ahead and released a song called Let's Roll. And this song here pretty much is from the perspective of the passengers on United Airlines Flight 93, who basically made up their mind that they were going to regain control of the plane and take it from the terrorists' hands. And because of that, the result, it crash landed in Somerset County, Pennsylvania. So So again, Wade Neil Young put the events of Flight 93 together in this song. Obviously very emotional, very powerful, and he did an outstanding job with regards to that. So I know we're coming toward the end of the program here. I know that nobody signed up for this program, but I went ahead and decided I was going to pre-record it anyway. That way, if you choose to go ahead and watch it on our YouTube channel or see it from Facebook, you could do that. Again, I hope that this program kind of inspires you, because I know a lot of people that I talk to like, oh my goodness, history is so boring. And here I found a fun way that we can talk about historical events through all kinds of genres of music. So everybody, until then, thank you, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.